Our turn where the Smurf gets smurfed.
Yeah, but you're milking it. Don't milk it.
The Smurfs.
Here's my plan. We trick Smurfette into being naughty like us. And she'll have so much fun, she'll never go back.
Oh dear. Catch, please.
Don't worry, Smurfette could never be naughty.
Why are we going so slow?
Naughty, naughty.
Isn't this fun?
Just try to clean up.
The Smurfs.
What's going on over there?
Is this the lost village? Look, there they are.
What do they want?
What if they have scaly skin?
And giant claws.
We should be prepared for whatever we find.
What the? I'm really freaking out, you guys! Smurfs, the lost village.
What, the Smurf?
Holla, you little Smurf nose!
We're here to save everything. Goodbye, Smurfs, forever.
Now that's what I call a banger.
Smurfs, featuring...
Welcome back to the Nerdy Grill and welcome to a brand new franchise discussion video for you today. Today's franchise discussion is going to be discussing the Smurfs movie franchise in particular, because today is the release for the brand new Smurfs movie 2025 starring Rihanna as Smurfette. And if you've seen the trailers and even if you've seen the movie, yeah, it's got very mixed feelings from me and from a lot of people on the internet. But I wanted to go back and look over the Smurfs movies that we've had before it, because the Smurfs has always been a bit of a weird franchise. It's always had a bit of a weird audience per se that it's trying to target. Obviously, it's trying to focus more on family and for children. But some of the topics and themes and some of the characters and the way it visually looks at times, you know, can be leaned towards more of a, you know, more of an adult audience, and so that's why I consider it more as a family thing as opposed to just for children. But yeah, me and Smurfs, we've had a bit of a weird relationship, and I don't actually mind a lot of the films, but I'll get into my thoughts on those individually as we do the discussion video, because in today's discussion video, I'm going to be talking about a few different Smurfs projects. Now, obviously, originally Smurfs was created by Belgian comic artist Peyo in 1958, and they were originally known as Les Schtroumpfs, which they do mention, I believe, in the 2011 Smurfs movie in particular, where they go to a library at one point, and I think Brainy and a few of the others find a book all about them, and you get to see some of the old comic strips. So it's really interesting, and it got quite an interesting little bit of a background. But in today's video, I'm going to be talking in particular about a few different projects. So there's a few different movies in total. There's in total 5 movies and 2 short films in particular. However, I'm only going to be talking about 4 of the movies, but I will be also talking about the 2 short films. So, just very briefly, the first movie, which this is the one that I'm not going to be talking about in this video, but I will briefly mention it here. It came out in 1976, and it is an animated film, you know, based on the old cartoons, titled The Smurfs and the Magic Flute. I do remember watching this a very, very long time ago. I used to own it on DVD. And it was a fairly interesting, you know, bog standard Smurfs adventure. It was okay, but I don't really have many fond memories of it. But it is something that I might go back to rewatch at some point. But yeah, just know that is the one I'm not really going to delve into much here, because it's the one that I don't have as many memories of. But that is one of the first Smurfs movies, and so I just thought I'd briefly mention it in case someone else points out that I missed it off the list. But the ones that I am going to be talking about are the ones that are probably a lot more well known to people. So the first part of the video I'm going to be talking about is The Smurfs from 2011. You know, the first of the CGI crossover movies with stars like Hank Azaria and Neil Patrick Harris, which that's the one that I have the most fond memories of because I went to the cinema to watch that on release. Then I will be talking about Smurfs: A Christmas Carol, which is the first of the short movies that came out to bridge the gap between Smurfs 1 and Smurfs 2 and takes place roughly the same year as the events of the Smurfs 1. It's just a Smurf take on A Christmas Carol, but it's quite a nice little short film. Then I'm going to be talking about The Smurfs 2, which came out in 2013. So the sequel to the Neil Patrick Harris, Hank Azaria one, where they introduce some new characters, go to some new locations. And yeah, this one I also have fond memories of, and I did go to the cinema to watch this one as well. Then we will be moving on to the second short film, which is titled The Smurfs, The Legend of Smurfy Hollow, which is also a short film that came out that same year. It's a bit of a Halloween special. And in terms of continuity, does sort of follow the events post-Smurfs 2. So we will be discussing that. I quite like that one, to be fair. We will then be discussing a film that came out in 2017 titled The Smurfs, The Lost Village, or Smurfs, The Lost Village, which came out in 2017, where that one doesn't follow the previous movies and instead goes back to an old classic like animation CGI style, but that one's a fully animated one with a brand new cast. And then finally, we will be briefly talking about the most recent Smurfs movie that came out, simply titled Smurfs 2025. So let's waste no more time and jump straight into the first part of this video, where I'm going to be talking about The Smurfs 2011. Like I said, the first of these movies I'm talking about will be The Smurfs 2011, which was a film that I did see in the cinemas, and I remember all the advertising for it. It was all really quirky, weird stuff, basically trying to say that we're being invaded by these little blue people, these Smurfs. You know, they've come from nowhere, they're trying to get home, what's going on, and they showed the setting of New York quite heavily, because that is where this film predominantly takes place. So this film was distributed by Columbia Pictures and has a rough run time of 103 minutes, so around an hour and 43 minutes roughly. Not too short, not too long. And the core setting, there's two major settings of this film. The first 15 minutes takes place in Smurfs Village, wherever that's said to be, and then the rest of the film takes place in New York City, which, you know, whenever you get like a fish out of water, so to speak, where you get a cartoon character or an alien or something that lands, it's always New York. It's always New York because, you know, the Big Apple, you know, there's so much to see, so much to do, so many places to get lost. It is a really good filming location for the Smurfs in particular. But with each of these Smurfs movies, because obviously there's so many Smurfs, and obviously they're using CGI, they can't obviously use every single character. So they try to incorporate the core ones from the show or the comics that people know and love in particular, the more famous ones, shall I say. So in particular in this one, we have, I believe, 6 core Smurfs. We've got Clumsy Smurf, we've got Papa Smurf, we've got Smurfette, we've got Grouchy Smurf, Brainy Smurf, and I believe this was a brand new one specifically for the films, and they got Alan Cumming, I believe, to voice him, called this Scottish Smurf known as Gutsy Smurf, who's quite an interesting character, might I add, and I quite like Gutsy, to be fair. He is quite a cool, he's almost supposed to be like your strongman type character, you know, he's supposed to be really brave and tough and, you know, doesn't take no for an answer, but he is really good. I do quite like him. So you've got Gutsy Smurf as well. Obviously, anyone knows the Smurfs knows that the main villain Gargamel is also in this, and his cat Azrael. And in particular, the Smurfs crash the lives of 2 human characters. The main one, obviously, being Patrick Winslow, played by Neil Patrick Harris, but also you have his wife, Grace Winslow. So what is the core premise of this movie? Well, at the start of the movie, you're introduced to Smurfs Village. You know, you get to know some of the Smurfs. They introduce a narrator Smurf, you know, to sort of give us, you know, the deets of what's going on. And you find out that they're celebrating the Blue Moon Festival, where they're just all having fun and laugh. And then Papa has some crazy visions that something's going to go wrong, and those things end up coming true. When Clumsy accidentally leads Gargamel into Smurfs Village, all the Smurfs have to evacuate. Some Smurfs get lost and end up stumbling upon this magical portal, which takes them to the real world. And then Gargamel basically follows them through this portal to New York, and the Smurfs are trapped in New York and can only go back home if they are able to induce what Papa calls a new blue moon, which will open up the portal to take them back to Smurfs Village. And in order to help them out, they stumble across Patrick Winslow, who runs this. Well, he doesn't run it. He works for this woman named Odile Juvenel, who runs a cosmetics company, and Neil Patrick Harris's character does the advertising for her. You know, so whenever she does a brand new perfume or form of cosmetics or makeup, he has to do the advertisement to go on the billboards and stuff. And so they basically crash his lives. Him and his wife Grace are expecting a brand new baby, and so the Smurfs, you know, up to some crazy hijinks, just interrupt their lives. But also it's one of those movies where the Smurfs annoy them to begin with. In particular, they annoy Patrick, who doesn't really want them around. But by the end, he ends up loving them and wishing that they could stay. You've also got, obviously, like I said, the core antagonist of Hank Azaria's Gargamel, who does a fantastic job. He's hilarious. I love him. I love the fact that he doesn't understand anything, because obviously the time zones are completely different. You know, it's a bit like if you watch the MCU where Thor comes down to Earth and doesn't really understand our traditions and our values and how we do things. It's the same with him. You know, he doesn't understand phones. He doesn't understand cars. And I think that the New York setting really does wonders for it. But you also get to see all the Smurfs play a certain role. You know, but the core one for this one predominantly is clumsy, because it's all around him, because he feels that he can't do anything right, and all the Smurfs sort of, they don't belittle him, but they almost feel like, you know, he is clumsy. That is his personality. And so we need to sort of protect him. We need to stop him from, you know, joining gangs. He could ruin things, but by the end he becomes the hero and ends up saving the day. And in the end, they do get all the Smurfs from Smurfs Village to battle against Gargamel in the middle of Central Park, which I think is a really, really nice setting at night, you know, with all the blue magic that goes on. Gargamel being this evil wizard, he's, I believe in like the cartoons, one of his major things was he always wanted to like eat the Smurfs, was one of his things. In this one, obviously, he just wants to extract their essence in order to make himself the most powerful magician in the world. And that's sort of his core plan through these films in particular. That's what he's trying to do, and does it in just weird and wacky ways. The character of Odile, I think, is a really interesting one, might I add. She's very quirky. She even teams up with Gargamel at one point in the film. So that's quite funny, because Gargamel, being a wizard, is able to turn this lady who's deemed by Gargamel as ugly or old. He's able to make her young and beautiful again, so Odile wants to then sign him on in order to make products for her, you know, use his magic. So they do team up briefly, which is quite funny. I love Azrael. Funny cat. Brilliant. Love it. Yeah, it's a fairly enjoyable movie. I would say it's not nothing spectacular. Look, it's a kids movie or family movie at the end of the day, but it's a bit of harmless fun. Would I say it's the best movie ever? Not really. Would I say it's the worst movie ever? Also, no. I think it can be quite fun. In particular, just seeing the interactions between the human characters and the CGI Smurfs. There's a scene in a toy shop where all these kids think that they're toys and they're starting to fight over them. Gargamel's come in there trying to find the Smurfs, and he's using like leaf blowers and he's flying all over the place. It's just a bit of fun, and I quite like fun in my movies. So that is the Smurfs one, and to be fair, it did do well enough in order to warrant getting a sequel, and it was quite quick off the mark to get a sequel. But before we talk about the sequel, I do want to jump into a little bit of a respite in terms of the Smurfs, where they did put out a short film, which is all centered around Grouchy Smurf in A Christmas Carol. So, like I said, this is one of two short films that were released amongst this Smurfs film franchise, and this one bridges the gap between the Smurfs 1 in 2011 and Smurfs 2 that came out in 2013. And this one was titled The Smurfs A Christmas Carol, and is literally just another adaptation of the story of A Christmas Carol, you know, with, you know, Scrooge and the ghost of Christmas past, present, future, you know, trying to learn the error of his ways and, you know, basically see the true meaning of Christmas and the holidays. And that is just done in a more kid-friendly way, using the Smurfs. In particular, Grouchy Smurf is the one that the focus is on, and takes place all in Smurfs Village, with a bit of a smaller cast this time round. And obviously starts off with like Popper and Brainy and Smurfette and all going around Smurfs Village singing carols until they come across Grouchy's house, which has no decorations on it, and he's unhappy, doesn't want to celebrate Christmas. And so Popper, you know, tries to invoke a little spell in order to try and get Grouchy out of his little, you know, bar humbug spirit, to be perfectly honest. And you have the ghosts of the Smurfs of Christmas past, present and future, who show him what he was like in the past, what could happen now, and what could happen in the future, to try and get him out of it. And the ghosts are Smurfette, who is the ghost of Christmas past, whereby we learn why Grouchy doesn't like Christmas. And it all has to do with the fact that he didn't get, ideally, the gift that he wanted on Christmas, which he really wanted a hang glider to be able to fly around, you know, and have a bit of fun. He got a new hat, because all the Smurfs on Christmas, Popper gets them all around together, gets them all the gift, and it all is a new hat. And Grouchy's the only one who doesn't fully appreciate it, because he did tell Popper what he wanted, and Popper obviously didn't get him what he wanted at the end of the day. But Papa does specify that he makes all the hats special for the Smurfs, and you will realise that what he means by that by the end of the movie. But yeah, that's basically why we find out why. Then you cut to Brainy Smurf, who is the ghost of Christmas Present, showing what's going on in the village without Grouchy being around and what people are thinking about him. And then you cut to Hefty Smurf, who is the ghost of Christmas Future, who shows that, you know, all the Smurfs have left the village in the hopes of getting a new tree and new gifts in order to hope that Grouchy would cheer up a little bit, but ends up getting captured by Gargamel, putting all of his family in danger, and so that causes Grouchy, you know, to get worried and concerned, which does eventually snap him out of it. And by the end of the movie, we do understand that, you know, Papa did listen to Grouchy, and inside Grouchy's hat, because like I said, he makes it just for everyone, and his hat can actually fly. So he does sort of get the hang glider, but it's in his hat. So it shows that Papa does listen, is unique, and also Grouchy sort of comes to the realization that he needs to be a bit more grateful, appreciate the family that's around him, the people that's around him. You know, they can't always get what they want, but, you know, Papa does get what they need, you know, and does look after them. So it's quite a nice little, a short, to be honest, short little film. You know, one of the more cheery, surprisingly, versions of it, but that's because it's the Smurfs. Would I say it's anything spectacular again? Not really. I'd say this one is definitely more aimed for kids than family. Would I say it's terrible? No. And it's got the right messages that they're trying to get across for the kids, if I'm being honest. So I quite like it. It uses some of the cast from the movies as well. Not all of them, but some of them do reprise their roles in this, like Grouchy and Brainy. You know, some of them do reprise their roles. But yeah, it is quite nice to see. But this was just a little bridge gap. Pause before they get to The Smurfs 2, which is the next film that I'll be talking about in this video, which came out in 2013. No more than 2 years later, and the Smurfs grace our screen again for another live-action CGI hybrid movie, with all the previous cast returning from the previous movies. But this time the setting is a little bit different. The previous film started in Smurfs Village and then ended in New York for the most part, whereas this time starts in Smurfs Village, but this time it mainly takes place in Paris, France. You do briefly go to New York for like 5 minutes, but then most of the film takes place in Paris. So a nice new location, and kind of, does it really make sense for the context of this movie? To a degree. But who are the core characters this time? Because like I said, last time, you can't use every Smurf, and did they want to repeat the process from last time? They decided not to this time. They decided to change it up a little bit. There is a fair few familiar ones, but there is a bit of a mixture this time. So our core character this time, last time it was Clumsy Smurf, whereas this time it's Smurfette. So you've got Smurfette, Papa Smurf, Grouchy Smurf, and Clumsy Smurf again, but this time, instead of using Brainy and Gutsy, we now have Vanity Smurf instead. We've also got 2 new Smurfs to a degree, but they're called the Naughties to start with, and then become Smurfs by the end, known as Vexy and Hackus, who were created by Gargamel in order to kidnap Smurfette, bring Smurfette to Paris, so that he can find out the secret into how Papa Smurf made Smurfette a Smurf, so he can turn his naughties into Smurfs and then have an infinite supply of power. You've got Gargamel, Azrael, you've got the return of Patrick and Grace Winslow, again played by the same actors and actresses, but this time you've also got the introduction of Patrick's dad, Victor Doyle, and also their now born son, Blue, who he named after the Smurfs and after the Blue Moon as well, so after their little adventure, which I thought was quite nice. So they're your core characters. So what is this film about? Like I said, it all takes place on Smurfette's birthday, where she has a nightmare about, you know, her past and how she came to be, and that she wasn't actually a proper Smurf. She was created by Gargamel to trap the Smurfs, but Papa showed her kindness, and so then she became a Smurf, and she always worries that she's going to turn bad again, and that the Smurfs might not see her for who she is now, but for who she used to be. The Smurfs play a little bit of a, you know, it's a generic thing, or you pretend you forgot someone's birthday, but then you surprise them with nice stuff at the end. But they do it in a bit more of a mean way, and so Smurfette feels like they've forgotten her birthday and don't care about her, so she goes off wandering. Meanwhile, back in our universe, the human world, Gargamel's now become a big famous wizard, magician. He's playing in theatres and on stage all across the world because of the events of New York. And so he's got his most recent show in Paris where he's able to turn, Azrael huge, make things appear, turn people into things, make things float. He's doing really well for himself, but he's running out of his magic juice that he uses, the Smurf essence, and so creates the Naughties in order to try and send them through, capture Smurfette, bring her back so that he can then turn them into Smurfs and have a constant supply of Smurf essence, which they're able to do. They separate Smurfette, they capture her, bring her back, and the Smurfs basically have to travel to our world to basically find Smurfette again. And to do that, they want to have some help, and so they go to Patrick and Grace's house in New York and recruit them, along with Patrick's father, Victor, and their new son, Blue, and they all go to Paris together. But it turns out that Patrick and his dad don't really see eye to eye, because Patrick's dad supposedly, when Patrick was little, got rid of his pet parrot, and he loved his pet parrot or pet bird, Zeus, and never told him about it, or did it behind his back, or something like that. He wasn't very happy about it, but it turns out in the end that he only did it because Patrick was actually allergic to the bird, but Patrick was always led to believe that his father was allergic, and that's why he got rid of it. So it's a bit of a misunderstanding. And so through this film, you get to see Patrick and his dad grow closer together. So it's really quite nice. And it's not really his dad per se. It's his stepfather. But, you sort of treat them like father and son, even though it's his stepdad. But still, they have a great bond and great relationship. And he's a great addition to the cast as well. Quite funny, if I'm being perfectly honest. Makes Patrick take a bit of a sidestep. And then meanwhile, the Smurfs, they're also getting a bit of a father or stepfather, step-papa vibe from, Papa, Smurfette, and Gargamel. They got a bit of a thing going on because obviously Smurfette feels like they don't care about anymore. So she turns to Gargamel, who Gargamel starts to manipulate her and pretending that he actually cares about her. So Smurfette then has a bad relationship with Papa Smurf. So there's a lot going on. Meanwhile, you've got these new characters of the Naughties who are trying to influence Smurfette to be bad and do naughty things again, turn her back to the way she used to be. She almost turns and becomes Gargamel's little protege again. It's all quite interesting, and the setting of Paris is quite nice, to be fair, and there's some great music. Both these Smurf movies, I didn't mention before, have some great music and soundtracks. I've listened to the soundtracks a fair bit. I think they are really, really good. And like I said, they use the settings really well. And the new character, well, he's not a new character, but for this movie, bringing in Vanity instead, I think is quite a fun one as well. One who's constantly checking his looks and how he, his appearance, I think was a bit fun. They even do a bit of a mini arc with Grouchy, where Grouchy's tired of being grouchy all the time and so becomes what's known as Positive Smurf. So tries to be more happy, which is a bit of a weird arc to go through, but hey ho. Patrick's stepdad, Victor, gets turned into a duck for about half an hour of the movie, a side effect of infiltrating one of Gargamel's theatre shows and confronting him head on, and so he gets turned into a duck. Very weird and bizarre. But yeah, it all obviously ends well in the end, because obviously Smurfette finds out Gargamel's true intentions, betrays him, the Naughties get turned into Smurfs, and they end up going back with Papa, and Gargamel gets defeated, and Patrick makes up with his stepdad, and everything goes back to the way it used to be. And it's quite nice, and a nice, fun end. It's hard for me to determine whether I prefer Smurfs 2 over Smurfs 1. I think they're probably about equal for me. I've gone back to watch them a few times. I would like to do another rewatch of some of these at some point as well. But yeah, again, nice family film. Not the worst film in the world, not the best film in the world, but an enjoyable one nonetheless. It's not one that I would turn people away from. But that is the end for the Neil Patrick Harris movies. Neil Patrick Harris never returned to do any more because unfortunately the second one didn't do as well. And so they decided to cancel the plans for a potential third movie in the franchise. But that didn't stop them doing one more little short film before we had a bit of a longer pause before getting into the next major Smurfs movie. So let's jump straight into the final short movie titled Smurfs, The Legend of Smurfy Hollow. But like I said, this live-action CGI universe of the Smurfs did come to an end with this short film, The Smurfs, The Legend of Smurfy Hollow, which came out the same year as The Smurfs 2. Unfortunately, there was some sad news that did come about after the filming of Smurfs 2. the voice actor who plays Papa Smurf, Jonathan Winters, sadly did pass away, and so his voice actor was then changed for this little short, which was really, really sad, and when I found that out, I was absolutely gutted. But yeah, the Smurfs Legend of Smurfy Hollow was a Halloween short film special, and it follows a couple of Smurfs. Again, they change it up again and make new Smurfs more of the core characters, which I think is quite nice because you get to know a couple more characters in a bit more detail. So this time it starts off in like a CGI, the CGI that we're used to with the Smurfs, where you've got like Clumsy and Hefty and Brainy and all have gone out, Panicky, sorry, they've gone out to collect some stuff. Their cart has like broken down, and so they make a little campfire and they start telling each other ghost stories or scary stories from the past, which leads us into our core story for this film, The Legend of Smurfy Hollow, where it takes place during this big festival, this Smurfberry hunt, which takes place every year. And you've got a bit of a rivalry that goes on between Gutsy and Brainy, who, you know, Gutsy thinks he can win. Brainy like laughs, thinking that, you know, that he's always going to win because he knows the secret. He's the best Smurfberry hunter. You know, so you've got that bit of a rivalry going on. But Gutsy, you know, doesn't believe this is the case, so he spies on Brainy, finds out that Brainy's actually been hiding a stash and is cheating. But yeah, it's quite interesting to see the rivalry between it, and it's quite nice to have Gutsy, you know, a Smurf that was created predominantly for these movies, you know, be our core character that we get to follow. And like I said, I like Gutsy, and I think he's done really, really well. And again, most of the voice actors from the films have come back to play them, apart from obviously at this point Jonathan Winters, sadly. But also Smurfette was not played by Katy Perry, who plays Smurfette in the previous movies, not the short movie, but for Smurfs 1 and Smurfs 2. But yeah, so it is quite interesting, and obviously you've got Gargamel, who's still out to get the Smurfs, played by Hank Azaria, which is really, really nice to hear his voice in the animated style as well, so that's really, really good. It proper feels like a good Smurfs cartoon because it's got that 2D animation style as well. You don't go to live action at all, you just got the CGI and the 2D animation style, which is really, really good. You know, I quite like it. It's just a bit of fun. It's just a bit of Halloween fun. Is it my favourite of this Smurf universe? Not really. I don't have many fond memories of this one because I haven't watched it a great deal. But I do remember the Smurfberry hunts, and I do remember that we do actually as well get short cameos as well. Very briefly, once obviously the core conflict is resolved because Smurfette and Brainy, they get captured by Gargamel, and they have to be rescued. When they're eventually rescued and the day is saved and Gargamel's defeated, they do have like a big festival and dance, and you do actually see both Vexy and Hackus, the naughties from Smurfs 2, at the festival as well. So showing that obviously this event takes place after the Smurfs 2 and that they are canon to those events, which is quite nice and quite interesting, but that is unfortunately the last time you ever see them because they don't come back again. But yeah, unfortunately, like I said, due to the, Smurfs 2 not doing so well, they ended up cancelling the plans for Smurfs 3, so we didn't get to go back to the way it was. And we then had a bit of a gap then between the next Smurfs movie. We had a 4-year gap to wait, as opposed to 2 years between the other one, so double the wait time. And where they decided to change up the formula, and where we got the third major movie, or fourth major movie if you want to count Smurfs and the Magic Flute, in the Smurfs franchise. This one being Smurfs The Lost Village, which is the next one we are going to tackle on this franchise discussion. So now the year is 2017. We've had a 4-year gap, and we've now moved on to Smurfs The Lost Village, which is now a completely CGI animation film. No live action crossover, no Grace and Patrick Winslow, no Hank Azaria as Gargamel. They've changed all the cast. There is a brand new cast. It's almost like a full reboot of the franchise. Brand new movies, which I'm sure would have branched out and done a lot more in the future. But at the moment, and as far as we're aware, this is just a one-off movie. And it looks quite nice, I must admit. For 2017, and for being a full CGI animation movie, it does look visually quite nice. It's quite smooth, quite clean, quite colourful as well, and it's really, really good and tackles some interesting themes. Like I said, brand new cast, so you don't have Katy Perry as Smurfette. I believe Demi Lovato took the role as Smurfette in this particular movie, because that became a thing you know, who's playing the role became a huge thing. Like, I know it's the most recent thing that always gets talked about when you talk about Smurfs 2025 is that it's Rihanna. But no, Demi Lovato is the one who does Smurfette, I believe, in this movie. She does a fairly good job, to be perfectly honest. I think her, Katy Perry, you know, and Rihanna, they've all got their own different quirks and they take on the role in a different way. But I think there's something about the way that Demi Lovato did it was something that I think she's probably my favourite of the three, if I'm perfectly honest. Even though I really did like Katy Perry as well. But yeah, so what is this movie about? Well, it's called The Lost Village, and it's called that for a reason. So the core focus, again, is on Smurfette. You've got a couple of Smurfs that take the lead in this, but Smurfette is your prime one again in this one. Not because she gets captured or anything like that, but she does begin to question her purpose. Being the only girl Smurf in the village, she wants to know why. What is a Smurfette? You know, because you got like Brainy Smurf because he's clever. You got Clumsy Smurf because he trips over all the time. Baker Smurf because he can bake stuff. But what is a Smurfette? And she doesn't really know what that is, and so wants to try and find out what it is. You know, because she was, like I said, she was created by Gargamel to trick the Smurfs, and then was just turned into a Smurf. So she doesn't really know what she is, and so it's about her trying to find herself and what makes her her, really. And so Smurfette, Clumsy, Brainy and Hefty go on a little adventure to sort of find that out and discover this secret mysterious village that's been talked about. And also Gargamel's doing the same, trying to find this lost village. And you've got also Azrael, but also he's got this pet vulture called Monty who joins him for this film as well. So you've got two little animals for the price of one. So they're all looking for this lost village, which they do eventually find, and they find it's actually a secret village of Smurfs who are all female. So it's basically the opposite to Smurf's village, and you've got some interesting ones like Smurf Willow, Smurf Blossom, lots of different characters in there, named after fun things as well. I like the little quirky names that they've got off of them. But they're almost like, I wouldn't say they're feral, but they resort to using more nature around them now, you know, and they're not like the Smurfs, they're different. But it's really interesting and good to see how they're almost curious of each other. They don't quite trust each other. And that is very, very clear with Smurfette. And like I said, it's all about Smurfette and who she is and where she came from. And Gargamel also is very, very different in this movie as well. You know, he's very manipulative in this one as well. He's more cunning than he is in the Hank Azaria variant, who is a bit more of a goofball. He's still a threat, but he felt a bit more cheesy and a bit more of a goofball. Whereas this one, he seems a lot more dark and cunning in this one as well, and really like tugs at the emotions and heartstrings of the characters to try and get what he wants. And you know, it is quite dark because towards the end of this movie, you do actually see like Smurfette temporarily get taken out of action. And it is really, really dark, but you do see Smurfette finally find out who she is, what her purpose is, you know, all about her nature and her personality and her kindness and her caring, but also the fact that she is quirky, she's also clever, she's strong-willed, you know, you get to find out all these things about her, and she does find out where she belongs and the villages mixed together. It is really nice, and it's nice that they use a few different characters, but yeah, obviously Brainy and Clumsy, they're like fan favourites as well. But it's nice to see Hefty getting some more action as well and a bit more of the limelight, so to speak. And like I said, I did quite like it. And the pacing of this movie is done really, really well. And it is a bit of a fun movie. I will say I do think that the live action movies are a bit more fun. But visually, I can't deny this movie does look really, really nice. And would I recommend this movie? Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's come on. It's a bit of fun. But obviously then we did have, unfortunately, this movie was successful but not successful enough, and there was then another massive pause in the Smurfs movies, a gap of 8 years to be exact as well, because obviously 2017 was when Smurfs The Lost Village came out, and obviously we've only just had the release of Smurfs 2025, which I'm going to discuss with you now. I'm going to give you my initial thoughts. I'm going to give you my thoughts that I had when watching the trailers. Yeah, so let's just pause this for a second, and I'll be back with you to discuss Smurfs 2025. Oh boy, Smurfs 2025. Now, I think this suffers from a problem that a lot of films suffer with nowadays, especially kids' movies and especially family movies and even upcoming ones. And yes, I'm looking at you, Shrek 5, when you eventually show your face. But yeah, Smurfs 2025. Okay, the first thing is, and if you know anything about the advertising for this movie, you know the main problem that I'm going to start with is the fact that it's all been advertised and based upon the fact that Rihanna is playing Smurfette. If you're starting your movie like that, and if you're starting your advertising just because this person is playing this character, you're starting off on the wrong foot. Because if I'm being honest, that's not how you should sell a movie. Because just because you've got someone big in it or someone famous that someone may know does not mean that they are best suited to play that character or that they will do that character justice. And that is not always the best way to advertise. You need to advertise it based on the quality of your movie and the content within your movie, not just, oh, look at this name star that we've got here. That clearly that means it's going to be great. That's not how you do things, if I'm perfectly honest, and so that always annoys me. It might just be me that it annoys, but I'm not a huge fan of that, if I'm perfectly honest. You know, so-and-so is this. Well, okay, whatever. It was the same with the Mario movie and Chris Pratt playing Mario, even though, in the end, I would say Chris Pratt did a fantastic job as Mario, but beside the point. You shouldn't advertise your movie like that, and I don't like the fact that they did that, if I'm perfectly honest. Then also visually, this movie is very jarring. It's very jarring to look at. Go back and watch clips. Go back and watch the trailers, and you'll see what I mean. You know, the animation style that they're using, the 2D animation, the CGI bits, the live action when they go to the real world. It doesn't look right. It doesn't look like they fit, and it's weird considering that we've had the two Neil Patrick Harris movies 10 years ago now, over 10 years ago, and those Smurfs look way better than the ones that we're getting here. I don't know how we're taking a step back, if I'm being perfectly honest. It looks weird and it looks wrong. Then let's talk about the voice cast that you've got for this movie and whether they actually suit it or not. Listen to the voices. Rihanna's Smurfette, you know, when you think about Smurfette in the previous movies, from Katy Perry and Demi Lovato, they've got this gentle nature to them, but also this more sassy side to them, so that to show that they don't take no messing. So they've got that perfect blend, but it's still that sweet, gentle nature, but can switch. However, in this one, it seems more like they're doing just the more sassy, but almost like dialing it up to 11. You don't really see the kind, gentle nature of her, at least through the advertising as well. I just can't get with this Smurfette, if I'm being perfectly honest. She's not terrible, but she's definitely my least favourite, I think, of the Smurfettes, if I'm being perfectly honest. I can't quite click with her, unfortunately, in my personal opinion. You've got John Goodman then as Papa Smurf. He's all right, but again, I can see why they cast him, because John Goodman usually can play these sort of roles, you know, these fatherly roles, or these, you know, roles that usually supposed to have like lots of deep wisdom to it. And you can tell that it's there. It's just, I just don't think it fully fits. You've got James Corden, which... Look, James Corden, I used to adore James Corden back in the day, you know, with Doctor Who, with Gavin and Stacey, with everything. You know, James Corden was amazing, funny, you know, beyond belief. He obviously then went to America. Things changed a little bit. I think his ego got a little bit bigger. And he, you know, wasn't as likable. And the thing is, people now, when you see James Corden in a film or you hear his voice, a lot of people now go, ugh, not again, not James Corden, oh my goodness. And it's sort of like that here. I mean, I'm not surprised that he's in a Smurfs movie, to be honest. You know, and also initially, No Name Smurf, going through that identity crisis again, a bit like Smurfette in Smurfs 2. We're really treading some... and that's the thing, I'm going to mention this again quickly now, is it treads very familiar territory as well in things. You know, someone gets kidnapped. Papa, in this case, is the one who gets kidnapped. You reusing that from Smurfs 2. You have to go to the real world in order to save him. Okay, so we're also retreading the Neil Patrick Harris movies there again as well. You've also got, you know, copies of people. You know, like Papa has got a brother. You know, you've got Gargamel who also has Rosamel now. You know, a bit like you've introducing the Naughties, but it almost feels like they're doing it for the sake of it, you know, not as opposed to whether it's actually needed. And I remember watching the trailers and watching all sorts and just thinking to myself, this doesn't seem right, and this is really weird. And this movie is going to be really dated, because if you've seen anything of it, you know that there's topics and themes that come up and phrases that come up that just make this movie feel, you know, like it's going to be very of its time, and it's not going to date it very well. Like in like 5 years even, it'll be like, oh really, why did we really say stuff like that, and oh, that's old, you know. I don't think it's going to age very well, this movie, if I'm perfectly honest. But yeah, it's, like I said, very generic plot. You know, Popper gets kidnapped. Smurfette leads this group in order to try and save him, you know, while stopping Gargamel and Rosamel and this, that, and the other. It's very like by the numbers, by the books. If I'm being honest, when I'm looking back over all the Smurfs movies, I feel like this is low down, I think, personally. And from what I've seen online, that seems to be the case for the most part. It's very mixed. I've seen some positive things said about this movie, and I have also seen a lot of people basically being like, what is this movie again? Is this movie really a thing? Or very generic kids. You know what this is targeted at. But yeah, so Smurfs 2025, I would be interested to see what happens. Give it like a week or two, and whether they decide that obviously things are going to go ahead, proper green light, and continue on with more movies using these characters in particular. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But yeah, the Smurfs franchise overall is a bit of an odd one. If I had to say what my personal favourites are, I would say personally I'm really, really, for nostalgia and, you know, just for hilarity, I think the Neil Patrick Harris Smurfs 1 from 2011 and Smurfs 2 from 2013 are my favourites, if I'm being perfectly honest. Followed then probably by Smurfy Hollow and The Christmas Carol, and then probably Lost Village, and then Smurfs 2025. But I hope you did enjoy this video. Sorry it was a bit of a longer one, but there was a lot more to talk about, if I'm being perfectly honest, in this video. But if you did like it, please like it by giving it a thumbs up and comment down below your thoughts on the Smurfs franchise, and have you seen the most recent Smurfs movie? And subscribe if you are new. But for now, this is the Nerdy Girl signing off. I hope you've had an amazing day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye for now, everyone.